So just very quickly to my person, I'm a natural scientist by training and environmental scientist. I did hardcore experimental research on biodiversity issues in my PhD. But during that time I decided I want to work at Science Policy Interface because I'm sure that there's enough knowledge out there and it's more important to bring it in rather than producing new one. A personal decision for myself doesn't mean that research shouldn't continue. So this is my background, and I'm doing that now at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research for 12 years. And within that, we have been doing researching on science policy interfaces and combining this with actually implementing these kinds of interfaces. And that's the background that I'm bringing from me and my group. Oops, that wasn't the intention. So, first of all, when I talk about science policy interfacing, I think it's something that Hans already said. We immediately say, oh, this is this one. Yeah, there's science, there's policy, and a little bit of interfacing. But we understand it much more broadly. First of all, that we understand, and this is something we discussed already this morning, that the knowledge which might be relevant for decision making is not necessarily only coming from science. And also making policies or making decisions is not made by policy alone, but it's made by everyone who is somehow interfering with managing the environment. And then, of course, this is all embedded in society. Very often you see this with three circles, as society is the third circle, but of course we are part of society. So this is very important also to recognize. Now, normally in a summer school it would be your turn to work, but since we are a little bit close in time, I wanted to ask you actually what are constituting elements of a successful science policy interface. And since we don't have that much time, I used the poster session already to do that, so you don't have to work right now. Those of you who are in the room with the posters presenting here in the room, they already did that to some extent, in the sense that I now present some quotes from the poster sessions. For example, some of you said, I'm addressing directly policies like environmental impact assessment with Norkel or certification with Janina. But generally, of course, first of all, you have a research question. You don't have a policy question. That's something to keep in mind. Secondly, there's the issue, okay, how do you structure that interfacing work? And Chrissy, for example, said there's a continuous exchange with policy bodies. Katrin said, well, we have an advisory board to the project, which is mixed across policy and science. You could also think about, okay, but what do you need, what do you use to engage? So it could be joint games with actors, it could be participatory workshops, participatory scenario development, inclusive exchange, Anna Philippa mentioned, for example. So that's the third part of that. The fourth part might be then, okay, what's the output of that? Very often you refer to reports. Interestingly, nobody said, I'm going to write so and so many scientific papers. Of course, that's also a goal of every PhD project or so. Someone mentioned policy guides, also mentioning I would present the work rather in the local languages than just in English. You mentioned newspaper articles, decision support tools, education activities, so quite a lot of things. So you want to know what these boxes are about. Actually, there's a fifth one, which might be the most important one, because when it comes exactly to what Hans-Peter said this morning, it's all about impact. So Katrin said, I want this to be used in the next CAP reform. Alfred said, I want it to be used in urban climate mitigation. Boltiti said, I want to help the discussion in the processes on the coal conflict in India, or I want to support the Water Framework Directive. So this is a direct link, but of course, whether you are able to do that and impacting is of course the big thing. And this brings me to the framework, which I actually want to present to you, and maybe we discuss this a little bit with you in the coming days. If you want to understand a science policy interface, why it works and why it doesn't, you look at these 5 boxes. You look at the goals, so are they a clear goal? In the research project we have it, but is it also at the interface? Is it clearly stated with all actors? What is the structure, the governance structure? Do you need a body, an advisory board, whatever? What are the processes? So how do you actually function it? So how do you make interaction processes? How do you review the literature, etc.? And then of course, what's the output? mostly it's a report, but you could think about a decision support tool, a model, a scenario, what have you. But more and most important, of course, it's about outcome, or as we said this morning, impact. So what do we want to change? Do we want to improve biodiversity governance explicitly, or policy explicitly, or do we just have to also behavioral change and learning and so on? So in order to show you to that, to make it a little bit more concrete, I show you one example of my own work. We conducted, some of you will know that, TEEP, the Economic Systems and Biodiversity, a study which was well, set up some years ago, actually by politics. So they really just said, oh, there is this Stern report on climate change, it gives us great economic numbers for reasoning that we have to act upon it, let's do the same on biodiversity. And every biodiversity researcher was saying, oh my God, how could you do that? And we were actually, our first encounter with the ministry on that and saying, please don't do it. Yeah, because we were very scared that you cannot control it in terms of quality and credibility, but also in terms of the messages. And then they said, the typical political decision, no, we're going to go for it. And then we got gradually into it and saying, okay, if they are doing it, we want to ensure that it's working reasonably well. So, and so we got into that, and it has 3 phases. It has an interim report, it has major reports in 2010, and since then they're going on. There's a TEEP for agriculture going on, and many national studies. We just finished a German TEEP study, and many, many more things. You might have heard about this. With all these problems around the topic of economics and linking them to ecosystems. So back to my framework, what we had there, and this is very often the case when the interface is driven from the policy side, they say they have a rather vague goal. Here they say, we want to have something Stern-like for biodiversity. That was the goal. It was never more concrete in the beginning. Of course, later on this changed. And also the structure, normally you think about, okay, who do we need, who should we involve, and so on. But again, there, this was rather developed on the fly. So we said, okay, we need a good ambassador, so this was Pavan Sukhdev in the end, a very excellent person to present that, to be the face of that thing, and this worked extremely well. We had a mixture of institutions involved, which was already quite helpful in setting up, and we had a very strong advisory body with the head of UNEP, with the head of the EEA, and many, many high-level policy people, which was extremely very helpful. And then the processes, yeah, we had to call for contributions. Oh, we're going to write this report, so what do you think would be important there? We had an expert consultations, we had reviews, the usual thing, but it was not formalized like you have it in IPCC or in IPBES, where you have a very, very clear way of reviewing documents. But this was just on the fly. We had to finish by 2010. There was a clear timeline at the COP in Japan. Everything needs to be delivered, full stop. So you don't have to. You have to make a balance there with credibility and so on. And then we had a set of reports which were targeted towards different audiences. This is something we already discussed this morning. It doesn't make much sense making one big report, but rather doing one for local policy, one for national policy, and one for private sector. This is what we did, for example. For the outcome, the impact, this is always extremely difficult to measure because you always need a second planet without the study to really see, does it make a difference. We can just say, okay, it has been taken up in the CBD, it has been national follow-up projects. We see the natural capital logics disseminate everywhere. The following 4 days we'll have heavy discussions about whether this is good or not again. And this all needs to be this balance between the 3 items, attributes of science policy interfacing, which says you need to be credible, basically from the science side. You need to be legitimate, so you need to have a mandate somewhere from the policy arena, and you need to be relevant on the other side. And all of these are tightly interlinked. You cannot optimize everything of these. And also it's difficult to say what it actually means. It's also an issue of, that's the issue with the boundary object like ecosystem services or so, where some people think they know what it is, and it's the same with these terms here. Depending on which stakeholder you asked, he will judge on the relevance or the credibility quite differently than another one. And this is a challenge as well in terms of judging about how this is successful. But in the end, it's very important to talk about the outcomes and think about that. Outcome is what matters, and I just want to remind you that if you play a song to your audience, this is what you want to achieve. You want them to cheer, and this also reminds you that no matter how good we are with our facts, people act on emotions and much less on facts. And this is just something we need to keep in mind when we always talk about science policy interfacing and the challenges we have already. Why don't we need artists to convince the people rather than the scientists? Just to keep it in mind. So this is in brackets. It's not my topic here. So just to give you an overview, there is a typology of science policy interfaces. There are dozens, hundreds out there, and they all act quite differently. And there's a complexity of knowledge needs which they serve. Just very roughly speaking, they can be more policy-driven or more science-driven. If you like, the gold standard today are these global assessments like ICBES, like IPCC, like the Millennium Assessment. They are somehow embedded in the middle. Then you, of course, have political institutions like the environmental agencies in the countries, like the convention gremia of the international conventions. They are purely political driven. You might have scientific advisory bodies driven by science, by academies or something else. ICES is the International Committee for the Exploitation of the Seas. Actually the oldest environmental science policy interface that we have. It's already there for, I think, 80 or 90 years. But they are doing the research to decide on the fish quota in the EU. They always make recommendations and the EU regularly ignores them. That's the way they are working, but there's excellent research on them. And it's getting better, by the way, since the last CAP reform. You could think about strategic initiatives which you see popping up, especially in the last 10 years, like Future Earth, like the Sustainable Development Solutions Network on the global level. But again, they are very much science-driven. You could have interfaces bottom-up in the projects. Every EU project has to have somehow its own interface today. And then most important, and for many of these things, this comes in the end. So this is that you have your own politician, or the politician has your personal researcher. He can just call and say, look, I have a problem. Can you tell me in 5 minutes what's the problem? What do you think? Just because there's personal trust between two persons. This might be the most successful one, but it's actually the one that you can hardly research on, because no one will tell you about his personal friends, if you like. And then you can think about, okay, is there something in between dialogue interfaces? I will come to Eclipse in a moment. The TAB is a German example where there is a scientific advisory system to the German parliament. So I will try to, Esther, sorry, how much time do I have, Sultan?
You still have 10 minutes.
Okay. Good. So let's go a little bit into detail. Let's look at the EU as an example how complicated that is. This is, roughly speaking, the policy cycle of the EU. I will not go into all details. It's just saying you have an issue, problem identification, you identify possible solutions, you assess the policy options, you have an impact assessment in there, you have a formal proposal of a policy measure, then the politics come in, where you have to negotiate between the Parliament, the Council, and the Committee of the Regions as well, and then you go into national implementation, where you have all the same again. Then you have monitoring, reporting, inspection, enforcement, evaluation as well. So this would be the so-called policy cycle. And this would be, roughly speaking, potential possibilities how science could get engaged. You could think about monitoring, modeling, integration of different analysis types. You can help with the monitoring down here, and so on. And of course, the interactions and how you do that is quite diverse. So I won't go into detail. We did that sometimes, and this is heavily simplified. And actually, you will hear actually in the next talk, and I like that. I call it heavily simplified. In fact, some people say it's so complicated that you cannot talk about the policy cycle. It's not really a cycle because it's always a back and forth and so on and so on. But it helps us thinking about this. This is why we do models, and this is why we use the policy cycle. So just an example for which we have researched on quite a bit is the Invasive Alien Species Directive, which was developed over quite some years, and you will just see that. I would just want to use that to show you how long this can take, because there wasn't an invasive species policy in the EU, and it was complained a lot that there should be. So there was a lot of discussion, early research projects like ESEE Epidemy and Alarm. Then RTD somehow supported with that scoping studies, cost of impact studies, and other studies, and so on and so on. By the way, that whole project issue brought all the invasive species researchers quite tight together. They are a pretty good organized network to actually get also into that policy process. And then afterwards there was the policy deliberation 8 years after the starting of that whole process. And today we are with the implementation. For those who are interested in that right now, one very important element is to set up a list of species of community concern. And this, if a species is on that list, you have to act on it to eradicate it or at least fight it in your country. This is why the raccoon is there, because some countries wanted to have the raccoon on the list because it was just starting to invade. So with that policy, they would have an option to say nationally, we have to fight it, so we need money for it. And then there are other countries like Germany where the raccoon is there for 60 years and we cannot get rid of it anyway, and they didn't want it on the list because they then need to fight something they probably cannot fight anymore. So this is then the policy side again, and of course the researchers complained that this list of 37 species is way too small, because they say you would need at least 100 species on that, because they are much more contested. So that's in a nutshell the challenge on the policy side. So let's come back to something we already discussed this morning. So the options that we have as scientists to engage in science policy dialogue. Again, some quotes from the poster session. The first one I assumed, as I said already, write papers from your work. I think somehow every one of us wants to do that. You want to publish your PhD. Okay, that's one way to interact, because you're writing a paper, everyone can access the paper, the policymaker can look at it saying, hey, I make a policy out of it, wonderful, you can think so. Then the second box is empty. I will come to that, why it's not unexpected from a PhD perspective. The third one is, yeah, I want to try to influence policy towards sustainability, towards participation, similar things. Or I want to directly interact with stakeholders towards goal. That's also something that was mentioned. Thirdly, there was also an issue, I want to develop a joint model or joint scenarios of land use or something like that. Or I want to develop a decision support tool which everyone can use. So these are different potential products and the way you wanted to interact. And this aligns with a model which I would like to present to you, and which personally me helped some years ago, but also we have the experience, helps people to think about what their own role is. And maybe we can also continue with that in one of the World Cafe tables afterwards. This model comes from Roger Pielke. He's a STS researcher in the US. And he basically said you can take up 4 roles as a scientist. They're very sketchy and broad, but I think it helps. First of all, what's your understanding of science? We haven't discussed yet so much the whole issue about discussing what is post-normal science, what are the underlying models of interfacing, and roughly speaking there are 2 of them. The old model is the linear model, saying I provide something as scientists and society takes it up. And then there's the dialogue-oriented one, which most of you are familiar with because you talk about participation all over in your projects, where you are really in the interface with the policymakers, with the other stakeholders. On the other side, you can also take a look at the way, the understanding of democracy, personally, but also sometimes country-wise. It's actually different from country to country. Whether you have really a strong role of social integration also in the policy process, or whether it's really this typical interest group based, so we have a right wing, you have a left wing party, and they never interact, so it's either them or us, and so on. So this is very roughly speaking. And from that you could derive 4 roles for a scientist. First of all, if it's a linear model and it's interest group based, you can just stay in the safe corner and saying, you are the pure scientist, you deliver something and leave it to policy or to take it up. You can be the science arbiter in a sense that policy asks specifically and science will answer specifically. This is actually the consultancy mode, if you like, and this is why, for example, I didn't saw that model in your PhDs, which is not surprising because rarely a PhD is embedded in such a consultancy approach. So that's the science arbiter. Then, of course, we can be the science advocate. If we are dialogue-oriented but are interest group-based, we take one side of the debate and use our science for supporting that side. And last but not least, this is the honest broker of policy and alternatives, which is then the most complicated role, if you like, because you have to work dialogue-oriented and you know how complicated it is, but also you try to stay reasonably neutral in the sense that you're not supporting one side, because then you would be an advocate, but you are really saying, okay, if you go that direction, then it's that option that you can do and that, and if you want to go that direction, you have this and this and this option, make a choice. But in the dialogue, you really hand up and open all potential roles for that. So these are the classical ways of basic science staying in the safe corner, but most likely lacking impact today. And this is the one you can decide for. In my field of biodiversity science, we discussed this morning a little bit when it comes to conservation. We are already normatively biased, and we are already, as a conservation biologist, very often perceived already by societal actors to be in that corner and saying, well, if you are doing conservation science, then you are directly a green advocate. Or you could say, okay, it's a difficult way, but I go for wicked problems like biodiversity loss. We need to fill that corner of really having this engagement processes. So that's about the outcomes. And so I close with some points from the Eclipse project perspective, because you have heard that Eclipse is co-organizing this, and actually you are part of Eclipse already without knowing, because we are doing a webinar out of these presentations for Eclipse, because we think that with that project we are trying to bring together new ideas and old ideas of really improving the science policy interface. It's currently a project funded by Horizon 2020, and it's really a broad participatory approach to bring scientists and policymakers and others together to ensure that decisions that affect the environment are made with the best available knowledge. That's the official saying, and just to give you some glimpses of that, how complicated it might be. One thing that we really want to improve, and actually summer schools like that are part of that, in the sense that you have to know your interface. So we need to do capacity building and reflection. What does it mean to act at the interface? And capacities to work as an expert or as a knowledge broker, or as an intermediate between science and policy, if you like. And for example, for that, we have something in the project that actually is led by Esther, where we have an online forum where we invite everyone to participate in our different thematic processes. And we launch these different elements gradually at the moment. So you can use that, you can get engaged, you can register, and so on. Secondly, we want to build a new perspectives of knowledge integration in the project, in the sense that we make it clear that we don't understand an interface as just us and them. It's not just us and them coming together for a time, but really creating an environment where we understand that it's a sort of alliance building between different stakeholders of really tackling a problem. It doesn't, in the end, mean automatically that then the policymakers say, oh, hooray, we now have to take that. Again, an interface is just a support of a policy process. And also what we're doing there, what is important is that we look at different methods, and we are creating a quite challenging process. In the end, it's not that challenging. I will not go into detail. If you're interested in that, we will have a session on Eclipse on Thursday morning. So feel free to come there. We will discuss in much more detail there about this. So it basically says we have an open call for requests for policymakers or from NGOs for questions to be answered. We have a scoping with them and saying, is this really the question you need to have answered for your problem? Then we have a consultation with the community We have an agreement on the requests. We have an expert working group set up. They are developing a protocol of which synthesis method they're actually going to use, because we have a set of 21 different synthesis methods right now. Depending on the question, depending on who needs to be involved and so on, you can just do a peer review process, or you can go a participatory process and many, many more approaches. Then again, this goes public, and you have draft assessment, which is reviewed, roughly speaking, and in the end it goes into a final assessment. So that's a very challenging process. The third thing I wanted to say to you is we need to be aware that we cannot get around, if we want to be dialogue-oriented and successful and have impact, we cannot get around to really discuss the complexities and the uncertainties of the process itself on the one hand, and of course on the topic we are tackling in the process. And this is why we believe, and this is why we try to implement with Eclipse this honest brokerage approach. It doesn't mean that for every thing we are looking at, we're having this idea of policy options aligned to each other, and then policy can use that and make a decision. We really think that the mutual learning process within this complicated, rather within the circle that I showed to you just, is actually as important as the product itself. That really people engaged, policymakers engaged, go back to their desks with a different, well, way of looking at things. And just to finalize that, as I said, our NOC forum is there. This internet forum is to get engaged. This is one thing. We are, of course, producing reports like every other good project. For example, this was our first knowledge synthesis, which was an impact evaluation framework for nature-based solutions projects. That's where our funder, the DG Research, asks us explicitly for. One of our products is this circle. We will have another talk on that on Thursday, which is how the different methods that I talked about, these 21, can be used in different policy settings of the policy cycle. And also, last but not least, we have open calls regularly for expertise. Right now we have this open call for a topic on the CAP reform, where we now invite experts to self-nominate themselves for expert groups. And this is all in a nutshell what is the challenge in that. And with that, I make a break here. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Actually, I have two questions, but you may choose. The first one, I was wondering, can you give an example of the policy options that you give with this new label?
You mean with the honest brokerage?
Yes, what kind of policy options, so that I have a feeling what is the variation between the options.
Well, yeah, okay.
And the second question, I'm interested in if you can give some examples of science policy interfaces at the national level, like best practices, if you're aware.
Oh, best practices.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, of course, this issue of the policy options, it strongly depends on the scope of a report. You know, for example, IPBES does that. They just list every potential policy option you have in a field. If you look at the first report of IPBES, it's about pollination and pollinators. They have a long list of policy options there and saying what could they be good for and so on. So this is the classical way. Of course, if you would interact with your policymakers before, you would probably boil this down and saying, okay, for our case, it's very nice that you talk about organic farming, but that's relevant for us for this and this reason. So please look at these and these potential scenarios of policy development, and please develop options there. So you cannot generalize it. The global interfaces tend to do it very broadly, where you then again have a problem of translating that down to the national level of being relevant. Because if you have a long list of global political options, then it's probably not relevant for your country. So that's a challenge. That's the first challenge. Then the best practices. I refer in Germany to something which is pretty unknown and which is unfortunately rarely used, which are the so-called enquête commissions. And this is where the parliament invites for a commission, where there's half of them is from parliament and half of them is scientists. And they are really negotiating and really discussing for a long time, for 2 years or so, until they write a report. And this is very interesting, and I think this is the most promising way. And of course, you can think about how to develop that further. And I think the UK, this will be actually in the talk, Juliet, which I'm giving as well. They have a longer tradition of that interactions between science and policy, also on the national level and on the local level. And they have a lot of these issues like commissions when they're thinking about. There will be an example in the next talk where I think they sometimes are very successful and sometimes they aren't. You never know about in the end, because the policy context of your work can change so quickly that at the point you started it was highly relevant, and half a year after and you deliver your reports, nobody cares about the topic anymore.
This may be a completely naive assumption, but in my head it makes complete sense to me that politicians would sort of desire this policy-based evidence. They want to come up with a policy that suits their worldview and represents whatever constituency they represent, and they want to develop an evidence base to justify their policies. But what has your experience been with civil servants? Has your experience been that civil servants are interested in evidence-based policy, or are they just as prone to politicians to proposing policy that is consistent with their worldview over necessarily scientific consensus?
I actually would say it's the other way around. I would say that politicians are not so much interested in evidence-based policy. They are interested in facts that support their views, so they will pick and choose. I think the civil servants are normally, at least in my experience, are those who are longer in the process and they know better what works and what doesn't work. So they will be more interested in having that evidence base. But of course it depends on also again how civil services in the country work and so on. You cannot generalize it. But that's my personal understanding, because normally the politicians are not an expert on a topic, it's more the civil servants who are. And this of course of course it depends on the setting. I think I told that story once that in Germany we have a huge problem of administrative gap in terms of that we haven't been hiring people for civil service for a long time in the environmental sector, and there's a huge gap. They're getting older and older. Everyone is 50 plus. And so we don't get young people like you into these positions anymore with the new knowledge you're getting here. And that's a huge gap which exists now in the civil service. Yeah, this depends again on the people and also on the trust building for a long time. Eclipse has been developing across researchers and the policymakers on the EU level for about 12 to 15 years until we could implement it. Well, as a project. It's still not implemented as a process itself.